So this is week 3 of our summer series, looking at the life of Joseph. And as Erin said, the holidays, there's no Sunday school, so these services are a little bit more geared to the whole age range of the church family. So if you're looking for a big, deep sermon this morning, apologies. But my prayer is we get something, a wee nugget, that everybody takes something home with them to look further and study further for themselves, because that's what we want to do, isn't it? So if you remember in week 1, quick recap, what was the title? Can anybody remember? No. It was chosen but rejected. Yeah, Joseph was chosen by his father. He was a favourite, but he was rejected by his brothers. He was chosen by God, but rejected by his brothers. And then week 2, we had rejected but blessed. He was rejected by his brothers in the pit, in slavery, but God blessed him in that place, didn't he? As he was in charge of Potiphar's house. And then Potiphar's wife lied about him, and he was rejected again and thrown into prison. But he was blessed by God there as he was the prison administrator. So this week's title, now I should give a wee bit of a shout out and hold my hands up. I did not come up with these titles all by myself. I had the help of the kids' material that we use here sometimes, Mustard Seed Kids. So this week's title is Puzzling but Plain. Puzzling but plain. And we're going to watch the video that they watched on Tuesday at Superheroes, because as you know, Superheroes on Tuesdays are going through the story of Joseph as well. And we'll discover that there were some puzzling dreams that was had by people, by three puzzling dreams. And the meanings of these dreams were quite plain, weren't they, for Joseph? Because he had God that showed him what they meant. And again, last week's disclaimer still stands. I apologise. The Americanness of them all, of these videos, and there are eye-rolling moments in them too. But the children really got them, and as they were going round all the stations on Tuesday, they were able to recount and remember because of some of these adult eye-rolling bits. So, without further ado, and I'm sure you're sitting comfortably, we will watch the video.
It's time for a Bible story.
The story of Joseph, part 3.
Do you need another refresher to get you caught up to speed on what happened last time?
Nah, man, I got this. Check it out. I'm gonna do a rapid-fire recap. Ready, go. Joseph had 11 brothers, and they were jerks. And then he had some dreams where everything was bowing down to him, and his brothers threw him in a pit and sold him into slavery, and then he worked for Potiphar, and then Potiphar's wife was a big jerkface and lied about him and threw him into jail. Boom.
Wow, that was actually pretty impressive. And yes, that's exactly where our story picks up. Joseph was wrongfully accused and thrown into jail, but it wasn't just a regular jail. This was a prison where all of the king's prisoners were sent, so it was extra secure. There is no way anyone was getting out of this place.
Yeesh. So I guess that's about it for old Joseph, huh? Well, it was fun while it lasted. The end.
No way, man. This is totally not the end of the story. Even though it looked like his situation was getting worse, the Lord gave Joseph great favor with everyone around him. The guards liked Joseph so much that they let him help out around the prison. They didn't even lock him up.
Whoa, that's crazy. So that's what you mean when you were saying that through this whole deal, the Lord was with him?
You bet. Because Joseph had a great attitude, was respectful, and cared about other people, his time spent in prison wasn't nearly as bad as it could have been. In fact, Joseph was so good at noticing people around him and going out of his way to care about them that one day, something happened that would change his life big time.
Oh yeah, you said last time there was this big thing coming up. Is this it?
Yep.
And you're not gonna get me with another to be continued, are you?
Well, I'll let you know next time. To be continued.
Ah, you gotta be kidding me.
Yeah, I was just joking. We're not done yet.
Whew, thank goodness. Really got me good there. So what happened?
Since this prison was where all of the king's prisoners were sent, there were 2 men that used to work directly for the Pharaoh. One was a baker, the other was a cupbearer.
Wait, a cupbearer? His job was to put bears in cups? That sounds hard. You gotta either have some big old cups or some tiny bears.
No, he wasn't a bear cupper. he was a cupbearer. That meant that he would serve drinks to the Pharaoh in a cup.
Gotcha. That makes more sense. So these guys were in jail, huh?
Yep. Since Joseph was in charge of the prison, the guards assigned these two guys to him. Then, one night, both the baker and the cupbearer each had some pretty strange dreams.
Oh boy, here we go again with the dreams. Oh, speaking of dreams, last night I had this crazy dream where my ears turned into chili dogs.
No! I don't want to hear any more about your crazy dreams. We're talking about their dreams. The next day, Joseph could tell that something was bothering them. Both the cupbearer and the baker looked like they didn't sleep very well and were all stressed out.
Well, I mean, they are in prison, not exactly a stress-free environment.
Yeah, but this was different. Joseph was very good at noticing people around him and caring about them. So he asked them what was bothering them. They told him that they had some very strange dreams, but didn't know what they meant.
I know what my dream meant, that I shouldn't eat chili cheese dogs right before I go to sleep.
Well, that's true. But when Joseph heard that they were troubled by their dreams, he thought of something. Back home, God helped Joseph understand what his dreams meant, so he offered to help interpret the dreams of the baker and the cupbearer.
Hey, look at that! Joseph's in jail. These guys go there too. Joseph can interpret dreams. These guys have dreams that need to be interpreted. You weren't kidding about God having a plan for Joseph's life, huh?
Exactly. The cupbearer and the baker both told Joseph what their dreams were, and God revealed to Joseph what those dreams meant. The cupbearer's dream was about a vine and 3 branches that sprouted grapes, and he squeezed those grapes into the Pharaoh's cup. Joseph told him what that meant, that in 3 days he would be released and would go back to his job serving drinks to the Pharaoh.
Good for him! That's awesome! So what about the baker's dream?
In the baker's dream, there were 3 baskets of bread sitting on top of his head. A bunch of birds flew up and started eating out of one of them. Unfortunately, Joseph told him that this meant that in 3 days, the Pharaoh would have him killed.
Yikes! Classic case of the old good news, bad news, huh? Did those things come true?
They sure did. 3 days later, the cupbearer was restored back to his job, and the baker was, well, let's just say he sleeps with the fishes.
What? Gross. Why would you sleep in a pile of fish? Ugh, that would smell terrible.
No, he took a dirt nap.
Wait, now he's sleeping in the dirt? I mean, that's better than a pile of fish, but still, just sleep in a bed, dude.
No, he died.
Oh, gotcha. Took a double dip out of the old cosmic cookie jar, huh?
Yeah, that's not a phrase. Never mind.
So what happened next? Those guys just left and Joseph stayed in jail?
Not exactly. Before the cupbearer left, Joseph asked him to tell the Pharaoh about his situation, that he was wrongfully accused of something that he didn't do and thrown into jail.
Oh, awesome. This is his chance to get set free. Did the cupbearer remember to tell the Pharaoh about him?
No. He forgot.
What? You gotta be joking me. So Joseph just stays in prison? Bummer.
He did for a while, but not forever. 2 years after the cupbearer was released, something happened with Pharaoh. He had some strange dreams and didn't know what they meant. It really bothered him.
Hey, this sounds familiar. Someone had a strange dream that needs to be interpreted? Who you gonna call? Dream Buster!
The Pharaoh got all of his wise men, sages, and the magicians together and told them to interpret the dream, but none of them knew what it meant. Then, all of a sudden, the cupbearer remembered that Joseph can interpret dreams.
Yes, it's about time you remember about him. Tell the Pharaoh, tell the Pharaoh!
That's exactly what he did. Pharaoh called for Joseph to be brought before him and explained what the dreams were. In one dream, there were 7 fat, healthy cows standing by the Nile River. Then 7 skinny, ugly cows came out of the river and ate up the fat cows.
Hold on. Why are you giving me all the grief for my dreams? That was the weirdest dream I've ever heard.
The Pharaoh also dreamed that there was a stalk of wheat with 7 healthy heads of grain. Then 7 other heads of grain sprouted that were thin and sun-scorched, and they swallowed up the healthy grains.
Whoa, talk about weird dreams. Joseph's really got his work cut out for him, huh? What in the world did those mean?
God revealed to Joseph what the dreams meant, and he told Pharaoh everything. He said that there would be 7 years of plenty in the land of Egypt, with more than enough food for everyone. But after that, there would be 7 years of famine where there would be nothing to eat.
Whoa, that's pretty serious. So, what did Pharaoh do?
He was so relieved to know what the dreams meant. He was also so glad to know that the famine was coming in 7 years so everyone could start preparing and storing up food.
Awesome! But wait, what happened to Joseph? Please don't tell me he goes back to jail. If he goes back to jail, I'm just gonna start swinging.
No, he didn't go back to jail. The Pharaoh was so impressed with Joseph that he gave him a job. Pharaoh made Joseph second in command over all of Egypt.
What? Seriously? The big number 2? Second in command? That is awesome!
Yeah, man. The only person in the entire country with more power than Joseph was Pharaoh himself.
Man, that is pretty incredible. You were totally right about God having big plans for Joseph's life. Doesn't get much bigger than that.
No kidding. Joseph's life was totally changed, and it probably wouldn't have happened like that if he didn't notice the people around him back when he was in jail. And something else was about to happen that nobody expected.
Nice try. I see you coming a mile away. You're about to do another to be continued, aren't you?
I sure am. Bam!
Yep, I called it. Totally called it.
There we go. Another to be continued. It was Malcolm mentioned to me on Tuesday about the fact that how Joseph served Potiphar, who was the number 2, and then became the number 2. Quite amazing, isn't it? So today's story can be found in Genesis chapter 40 and 41, and I'd encourage you to read these chapters for yourself, as always, when you get home. There is so much in the story of Joseph that to give it proper justice, we would need to take as long as Robbie looked at Colossians, I think. However, as I said before, my prayer is that there's something that you can take home for further study and reflection yourselves. And over the last few weeks, I've mentioned some things as the life of Joseph points us to Jesus, doesn't it? And there's been some fantastic things, and folk have come and spoken to me about different things that they didn't realise and how that then points to Jesus. And that warrants a lot of study in itself. But I'm going to quickly rattle through a few of them that have jumped out to me today as I studied this. So Joseph was in prison with 2 criminals, and Jesus was crucified with 2 criminals. In prison, Joseph was the means of blessing to one and the pronouncer of judgment to another, as Jesus was on the cross, wasn't he? As well, as we remember the story, don't we, of the thief on the cross that chose God. Joseph gave credit to God alone, and Jesus gives the glory to God. Joseph's desire was to be remembered by the butler, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Do this in remembrance of me." Joseph was delivered from prison by the hand of God. Remember, God sent Pharaoh a dream, and God raised Jesus from the tomb. Joseph warned of a coming danger and urged his hearers to make suitable provision to meet it. And Jesus warned his hearers that there is life beyond the grave, and we must prepare and be ready for it now. Joseph was exalted and set over all of Egypt, and God highly exalted Jesus. Joseph was 30 when he began his ministry, and Jesus was 30 when he began his public ministry too. Joseph became a saviour to people. Jesus is the saviour for all people. Puzzling, but plain. So many things in these 2 chapters are puzzling. Why was he in prison for so long? He did nothing wrong. The dreams were a puzzle, all 3 of them. And then there were Joseph's dreams when he was 17 as well. And it is plain for us to see, isn't it, as we know the whole story. So for us, it's plain and easy and simple to see because we actually know the story of what happened. But in the time and in that moment, it was puzzling, but it was plain because Joseph trusted God. Remember, we've said it, the Lord was with Joseph, wasn't he? The Lord was with Joseph. And as I was preparing for this week's message, just like last week, one verse in particular jumped out. It was as if the Lord underlined it before I got to underline it myself. Before I tell you what that verse was, I'm going to ask a couple of people, well, 4 in particular, to come and help me with something. And I've got a couple of fairies that will prepare the way as Scott and Denver and Tap and Donna come forward with their arms twisted all the way up their backs. They did all say yes, although they've got no clue what they're going to do. See the trust that they have. Thank you, yes, 2 on each side. Thank you very much. Take a pew, guys. Thank you very much. Don't they look lovely? You're very welcome. Would you like a nice fancy one? Or, yeah, they're all black. They're all going, do you know what we're doing? Do you know what we're doing? So what I'd like you to do is pop your blindfolds on. You trust me, don't you? Ha, 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 ha. And when I say go, oh, Denver, we're having a wee wardrobe malfunction. There we go. When I say go, I want to, in your head, count about 2 minutes. And when you think 2 minutes are up, stand up. And we're going to see who's closest to 2 minutes. So, are we ready? Let's go now. So, you see, Joseph was in slavery, wasn't he? And then he was in prison. And that time period was a total of 13 years, which is a long time. And just now, these guys are sitting on their chairs and they're thinking, and Scott's counting, he's probably about 15, or is he about 45? I don't know what number Dawn is at. Maybe she's at 60 already. What about Denver? What are you? You can see him mouthing the numbers there in his head, trying not to listen to me. Tap, what number are you at? Are you somewhere? No, she's laughing too much to think about it. But it must have been really difficult to be in the dark as minutes passed and rolled on. And we know that it was over 2 years that he was in prison, because it was 2 years after the butler and the baker and the candlestick maker, I always want to carry on and say, but after the butler and the baker were released, there was 2 years before he was released. So we know that he was there in prison for more than 2 years, don't we? So, and they're just counting down 2 minutes in the dark, listening to me rabbling on. And we just wonder who is going to be. I was going to do 1 minute, but I thought that's too easy. Well, maybe let them see if they can count down 2 minutes. Maybe they'll just be sitting there for 5 minutes and I'll be rabbling on, carry on. Who's going to be the first to stand up, I wonder? Who's going to be the closest? Okay, we've got one standing. I wonder, I should have a prize, shouldn't I? Oh. No pressure, but there's one person still sitting. No way! You can take your blindfolds off now. So Denver was first to stand. Was he about 20 seconds too early? Donna was about 18 seconds too early. Tap about 10 seconds too early. And then on the button. There we go. Well done. Thank you very much to my glamorous helpers. Thank you. Just pop it on the chair. That's grand. Thank you very much. You may sit down now again. And I mean, that was a wee bit of a laugh in it. And I can't believe he stood right on the button. Amazing. But it must have been really difficult as the hours passed on to days, passed on to years. And that verse that stood out for me as I was reading was in Genesis 40, verse 23. Yet the head cupbearer, butler, whatever you want to call him in your version of the Bible, mine says cup carrier, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. Oh, it's not a nice feeling to be forgotten, is it? Personally, I can tell you from first-hand experience, and here my mum sinks down in the chair a little bit more further. as poor Karen, left alone and forgotten on the street, finishing Girls' Brigade, nobody there to pick me up, forgotten about, where's the violins? I was forgotten. I suppose as the years go on, the story gets more elaborate, and I was left alone for 10 hours at Farrelly bus station, waiting. Actually, they hadn't forgotten me, and Dad was busy working, fixing a boiler, and lost track of time. But once it was nearly an hour that I was left. But in reality, most of the time I was with a leader. But now and again, I would get a wee bit embarrassed, and I would sneak off before they could see me, so they thought I'd been picked up. And I always had a 10 pence in my pocket because, guys, that's how much a phone call cost in those days, was a 10 pence piece which you popped in a thing called a phone box. And I made a call to my mum and said, he's not here, Mum. And she would track him down, and I would stay in that phone box, pretending to be on the phone, because it was a bit scary at night, 9 o'clock at night in the dark at the bus station, waiting for somebody to pick you up when you're 13, 14 years old. But I do love how the story elaborates and gets worse. But the truth was, I felt alone. I was alone. I knew he would come, but I did feel alone. And I did feel that he'd forgotten me. He probably hadn't. He says he hadn't. But these feelings are true. And Joseph must have felt at times alone and forgotten. Because 3 days after Joseph interpreted the dreams of the butler and the baker, it was then Pharaoh's birthday. And it came true what he had said. The dreams came true. The baker was executed, and the cupbearer was restored. And Joseph's only request, please remember me. And he was forgotten. Anybody else here guilty of forgetting something? My dad's not the only one. Fabulous. That just kind of looks like him, my mum phoning, oh no, I forgot. But why do we do that when we go, well, as soon as we remember, we all, it's a thing we do. But I'm sure we can all hold our hands up here and say, yeah, I've forgotten. And in preparing this message, the Lord highlighted a few things that I'd forgotten to do, that I said I would do, that I had to stop, take care of, and come back to. Because all of us are guilty, but God is so gentle and so good to us as he reminds us of these things. And it's astonishing that for 2 whole years, the cupbearer happily went about his business without remembering about Joseph. And what strikes me as I reflect on this passage, there's times in our lives when we feel forgotten, that we feel forgotten by others. And possibly, if we're honest, we sometimes think that God has forgotten us too. Many of you know about the years of ill health and chronic pain that I suffered. And there was times in that period where I felt completely alone. I felt that people had abandoned me, that they'd forgotten about me, that friends, that family had forgotten about me, and that God had forgotten about me too. And Psalm 13, that was our cry, our mantle, that we would often cry, Lord, have you forgotten? Have you forgotten me? But the truth in that situation was that God hadn't forgotten me, that my friends hadn't forgotten, and my family hadn't forgotten, because we all get days, don't we, where we're just like, oh. Sometimes there's no words other than sounds, is there? Because you see, feelings and how I felt, they weren't facts. And too often we give too much to our feelings and how we feel about something, and we forget the facts about what's really happening. We forget the truth. And don't get me wrong here, that God is with us. He is there. But sometimes we don't feel it, so we get too wrapped up in that instead of realizing the truth. Yeah? I hope I'm not the only one that's guilty of that. Feelings are real, but the truth is realer. Is that a word? It is now. It is now. And I wonder how Joseph felt. I mean, he was human too, wasn't he? I'm sure he had days too where he felt a bit discouraged. But chapter 41 begins with, when 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. And when the cupbearer, he had the dream, and the cupbearer, he remembered, there was this guy I met when I was in prison. He remembered. God had brought it to his remembrance. And verse 14 says, so Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. And when he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Joseph trusted God. And we must, in that prison, he must have used his time wisely. He must have. He was in that situation where he was ready. Now, I'm going to do another word here that I've made up. I think he was in a place of readiment. It's a word I have made up, and if you would like to know, I've even written down a definition of this word. The definition is preparedness, readiness, in a state of being ready to act when the need arises. I think that's quite a good word. I wonder if the Oxford Dictionary will take it up. The next time you're playing Scrabble, Mary and Penny, there's a word for you. The only way to be ready is when we are in that place, when we are staying close to God, even in those difficult times where we feel alone, to hold on to that truth that God has not forgotten you. Because Joseph was ready to act. He didn't have time, did he? He had a quick shower and a shave. He probably stunk. But he didn't have time mentally to prepare himself. He didn't know what he was going to face, but he was ready, and he was close to God and able to interpret the dream. God has not forgotten Joseph, and he has not forgotten you. And perhaps like Joseph, you might feel that God spoke to you about something. Remember, Joseph was 17 when he had those dreams. And it was over 20 years after, before they came true, before the next part, to be continued, that we find out later. That was over 20 years. Maybe God spoke to you about something and you're still waiting. You're still waiting. God's not forgotten. If he's given you a promise, he has not forgotten it. Hold on to that promise that God gave you. Hold on to that. He is faithful. Yeah? So in everything, God was given the credit. Joseph gave God the credit because verse 16 says, I cannot do it. Joseph said, I can't do it. But God. God was always given the glory. And that's something that we need to remember to do. Not to stay silent. When it's God that's done it, he gets the glory for it, doesn't he? He gets the glory. He gets the glory for this place. Yeah? And that came out of a place of unexpectedness. As Joseph was summoned quickly, God gave us this place that we were not expecting, and he gets the glory. And as I bring all these thoughts to a close, I want to encourage you that, again, afresh, you are not forgotten. God has not forgotten you. And there's so many scriptures, and some I've mentioned over the last few weeks, that encourage us when we're feeling in that place, when we're feeling alone, when we're feeling forgotten, to remember to hold on to the truth, the facts, and not the feelings. And as the band come up just now, they're going to lead us in a song of response. I just want to suggest a few more verses that you might want to write down to have a look at when you go home. And Isaiah 22, verse 21. He's not forgotten you. Joshua 1:5 and Hebrews 13:5. I will never leave you or forsake you. And Isaiah 49:18 there. I will not forget you. Behold, I have engraven you on the palms of my hands. And Deuteronomy 31:6. God has not forgotten you. And time has run away this morning, and I was going to play to close the Father's love letter. Many of you have seen it in the video. There are so many amazing, wonderful scriptures, that truth that we need to be reminded. We're forgetful people. Is anybody else forgetful? That's a thing this morning. But we're forgetful people, and to be reminded of those truths that God loves you, that God has a plan for you. He has not forgotten you. And I'll put the link to it on Thursday's email instead. But let's keep choosing. Let's choose to trust God. It is a choice that we have to make daily, hourly, sometimes every half hourly. We choose to trust God, even in the difficulties, in that situations, when you're in the pit that's 3 Malcolms deep, in the prison, whatever situation that we're in, that we choose to trust in God, because the truth is, you are not alone. You are not abandoned. He is with you. He does have a plan. He does have a purpose, and he is out working that. And you might not see it yet. Just like Joseph wouldn't have seen it quite yet. But in that, let's still continue to choose to trust, because he does know best. He has not forgotten you. To be continued.